So with that said, let's get started. The first panel is called Forging the Future, Innovation and Industrialization of NATO. I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Dr. Klaus Hommels, Lakestar and NIF, and Professor Dame Fiona Murray, NIF and MIT. Give them a round of applause and bring them on up. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for Fiona and myself to welcome you here. I think it's a very important event that is very dear to our heart. And sometimes you can see how important these events are on very tiny things. So Leslie just told me that it is the first time her parents came over from the US to see what she has been pulling off. So, and to the parents of Leslie, you can be really proud because that's a very important thing to our ecosystem here. So my motivation started in 2019. So that's the first time that I was on a panel and talking about defense. It was called the Cold War 2.0 and the role of tech. And from then on, I got the bug of the importance of technology in the context of sovereignty, because I'm a very, very convinced European. I love Europe. It's by far the best continent to live. And there's all the efforts we need to take to make sure we can defend it. From then on, I got engaged in the Munich Security Conference. I was chairman of the Venture Capital Private Equity Association to put these things forward. So, and it was no surprise when NIF came and asked whether it's a good thing to do, that in the forefront I met Fiona and discovered that we have exactly the same passion for that. So we thought NIF is exactly the right thing to start the ecosystem, to jumpstart everything that is necessary to make our ecosystem work. So, and I think Fiona has exactly the same passion, and that's how we got together.
Yeah. So I think for me, the journey started in 2016. Former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, who many of you will know of, came and spent the semester with my group at MIT. And I think it became abundantly clear that resilience, defense, and security was going to be the most important thing for us to work on for the coming decade. And in fact, it turns out that it's more than a decade. It really is going to, I think, be the important topic of our time. We spent time talking about the real shift in geopolitics, the great power competition emerging between the US and China, and frankly starting to talk about the European context and what was happening on this side of the Atlantic. I spent a lot of time in our laboratories across campus and at Lincoln Labs really trying to understand the future of drone technology and some of the kinds of technological solutions that were going to be essential. But it's always clear when you stand in a lab or work with scientists or technologists that without capital, nothing really happens. Without entrepreneurs and really committed investors, this sector wasn't going to take off. And so when NATO came to talk to me about how innovation could take a center stage, one of the first things I said is we have to get the capital side of the equation right. And then I met Klaus, and here we are.
Yes, and so we wanted to run you a little bit through the journey of the NIF, yeah, so to also understand the purpose of it, yeah, because it's sometimes misinterpreted. So it is about jump-starting the ecosystem. In 2022, let's quickly recall how dire the situation was. So we had less than 5% of VC funding went into defense tech. Yeah? ESG was basically preventing everybody from investing it. ESG was also in preventing from any bank to open an account for a company. It was preventing any bank from lending money. So we had zero dedicated tech funds, yeah, and we had absolutely no urgency in the society. And only Turkey was producing drones, and less than 3% of orbital satellites, yeah, were for military future. So, and then basically, two years something back, yeah, we got together 24 allies. We had 1 billion in commitments, And we have with John Rich the Mission Platform Group, where we have a special purpose to bridge the gap between the technology and the procurement side and make contacts within the MODs. Yeah? And the heavy lifting that had to be done was more than 3,000 companies we met. More than 250 introductions we did for these companies. Yeah? We met 100 plus people from MODs, from the military. We got MOUs with the EIF and the EIB to basically have corporations from not investing as an EIF to having an own fund. All that happened in the last 2 years. And finally, also having the universities from not at all looking at it to now have dedicated labs for that. So the momentum grew across the ecosystem. So the funding with this whole trend grew 11 times. The R&D increased a lot. And the rise of the interest of the population in this, given the tailwind we have, unfortunately, from the war, has increased massively. So today, after the 2.5 years, where have we come with what we've done in the NIF side? So basically, if you look at the different domains, there are clear winners in the different domains. So as a multi-domain, we have the Helsing, F&R, we have TechEver, we have Cambridge Aerospace, Titan, and the different ones. And the blue ones are the ones that NIF invested. So basically, not only did we really push the ecosystem, we also identified the perceived winner and made sure the NIF is invested in this. This is important because with the investment of the NIF, there come a lot of advantages, faster procurement, and an effort from NATO to make it a standardization and interoperability. So we got to something like 70 billion in market cap, and 100 million in grant funding, more than 3,000 people. Spectacular success if we had to prognose it 2 years back. There's one thing missing, and this is the number of output. The output is still low. That is not an industry yet. If you see how much we need to produce given the threat, this is the next phase of the development of the ecosystem, and Fiona will go on that topic.
So I think many of you in this room know that the traditional aiming point for military planning, for the planning that is done as part of the Strategic Defence Review, the National Security Reviews, and NATO, is often sort of out towards around 2029. And we think about that in part because that's after the next US election. It was also the sort of general consensus about timing. But I think today you only have to open the newspaper to know that, in fact, time is, in fact, running out, and we don't really have the capacity to build what is needed, what's probably needed this year and next. And even if we maximized our capacity, we would have a real challenge meeting what we need in 2029. We know that aggression is coming closer. I'm not sure you can see the map exactly, but it just reminds us, whether it's the drones entering Poland's airspace, whether it's the joint military maneuver between Russia and Belarus, Copenhagen airport being shut off because of drone sightings, the Danish airports across being shut, and the weekend, the incursions again back into Kyiv. The aggression really is absolutely on our doorstep. In fact, it's right at our front door, we believe. If you start to look at this in terms of the numbers, I think it's easy to talk about it in general, but for us, it's the numbers that really matter. You can start to look at what Russia is actually able to do, even with its quite traditional industrial base. It's producing over 50,000 long-range drones every year. It's now producing over 2 million short-range drones. And in fact, in one night, as we saw over the weekend, Russia is often using 1,000 drones overnight. And so if you start to imagine, what does that mean in terms of the capacity that we would need to defend some of the major cities on the border with Russia? What would that look like if you actually think about this in capacity terms? And to put this into context, it probably means that we need to massively increase, more than double, our air defense missile systems. We need to build many, many more missiles. At the moment, the capacity is somewhere closer to 5,000 a year instead of 50,000. And we certainly know that we need to build thousands more interceptor drones. And so we simply need far more equipment. And we need both the traditional equipment, but we also need scaled new technology. It's not enough just to have an idea. We have to be able to produce it at scale on the assumption that all the NATO equipment can be used to defend the 12 easternmost capitals. We still don't have what we need in our hands. And let's ask the question, have we been preparing? Have we been preparing to be on a wartime footing? And I think we can safely say that the answer is no. In fact, since 1992, the number of battle tanks and fighters and surface combatant and command submarines have all gone down. And the increase in capacity between 2022 and 2025, we haven't increased the number of those traditional bits of technology that we really need. And we don't see that changing anytime in the near future. The current parts of technology, whether it's from helicopters to tanks to aircraft to frigates, the lead time is incredibly long. And this is both a technological problem, but also, I think, a financial one.
Yes, and if you think about it, we are sitting now with the money there. We have to order stuff to be prepared. So what is clear that here it's the first sign. In the last 2 years or 3 years, we weren't able to ramp up quickly. And this shows that with the lead times, we will also not be able to do that the next 4 or 5 years. So what does it mean? It means that we lack the production capacity. You see that on this complicated chart here. So what it shows on the left axis is backlog to revenue. That means in years that the orders are, for let's say for an MBDA, are 8 times higher than the revenue. That means they do not catch up in producing the stuff, meaning structural production capacities are not there. Why are they not there? Because you do not have long-term contracts with the military. If you have long-term contracts, a 10-year contract, you go with that contract to the bank, you get financed, and you can build production capacity. If you have a 1-year contract, not happening. So you see 2 things here. First, crazy backlog. And second, except for the Kongsberg and Rheinmetalls, on the x-axis, the revenue growth, with a 20% or 30% revenue growth, you are not getting to levels where we need to get to. So the other thing that we have is a very high fragmentation of the market. This is a typical European thing, because with the EU we think we need to have like 25 airlines and 37 banks and so more. So this at the end won't help. Yeah? So we need to a little be honest to ourselves. In order to be really efficient, there needs to be a higher concentration in this industry. So the good thing is, and that's why we are both very, very much intrigued by this industry, it hugely combines the patriotic element and the advantages in terms of economic profile. So currently at a 100 billion defense market, that will grow to like 300 billion. Yeah? At a current, with certain revenue multiples that are in this industry, we have like 35 times the emerging innovative winners, or another 10 Volkswagen. So this is a really interesting sector the European industry should focus on, because it will be replacing ancient sectors. So how do we get ready with this?
Okay. Thank you, Klaus. I like that you give me that work to do. What are we going to do next? Right? So what do we need to do? We need to be able to couple innovation on the one hand with production at industrial scale on the other. And you might say, well, what's the playbook for that? Traditionally, our economies have grown by really being the focus of innovation, both in the US and here in Europe, and we've really allowed industrialization to happen elsewhere in the world. We've allowed that scaled industrial base to largely be built and scaled in China. And today we can't really do that. Do we have any template or model that we could look at to say, well, what can we learn? And I think it's fair to say that we've done it before, and we can surely do it again. And I think the best example and the most recent example is really with COVID, and our ability not only to design an extraordinary innovation, which is the COVID-19 vaccine that was designed in a matter of months, but also the ability to then produce it at extraordinary scale and then to deploy it to millions and millions of people. And so we do have a playbook, if you like. It's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of inspiration that we can take from that. And certainly when it comes to defense technologies, we needed to get the ecosystem going. Klaus has already talked about what needed to be done and the work that the NATO Innovation Fund did to be able to build that foundation, and the foundation that many of you have been so important in establishing. And so some of that was the common vision. It was a vision that said resilience, defense, security were essential to our time. These were not things that should be just sort of ignored and pushed into a corner because they were antithetical to ESG. They were actually central to what we need to defend ourselves. And so that common vision. We needed to start to crowd in investment, and the very fact that there are many investors here and in companies today begins to get the capital flywheel going. But governments also have to play their part. I mean, how many reports have we read? How many meetings have all of us sat in saying, yes, we need to improve our procurement process? I think the awareness is there. There's still an incredibly long way to go. I think the UK and other European countries could be at the forefront of that, but there's still work to be done to really reduce the frictions, to shape the contracts, to make it easier to test, to evaluate, to demonstrate, and to scale. And then lastly, we needed this international collaboration. One of the most interesting, I think, and exciting things about the NIF activity has been our commitment to the 24 allied nations that have contributed to the fund and to the entirety of NATO as a place where we're going to find the best ideas, to build extraordinary teams, to find investors, and to really be at the forefront of innovation. And so those are the foundations that we want to build on. And what we're really trying to do is then say, all right, who are the players? So we've done a lot of work and will continue to work to support and fund the emerging innovative winners. We need to be sure that we have an incredibly strong and continued pipeline of innovators and entrepreneurs building the next generation of companies. But on their own, they're not going to be able to solve this problem. You've seen the kind of traditional military technology that we need, and you've heard us describe the scale of the industrialization challenge. And much as with COVID, where we needed to couple the ingenuity of the private sector innovators with the scale of the existing industries and companies like Pfizer and others, we see the same phenomenon here. We need to be able to couple those innovative winners to the traditional defense players and to players from adjacent industries who have that extraordinary production capabilities and capacity. And so that's really the direction that we are moving in, is to support each of those verticals and then also bring them together.
So this view came basically from the work we are doing every day and have been doing. Yeah? And we thought together, what is it that the NIF and the NATO can do with this authority? So, and when we looked at what has been done, so we're on the traditional defense players, yeah. So we need to be helping lobbying the long-term contracts and the regulation. So this is something that is instrumental to get those guys going. From the adjacent players, yeah, we need to have transparency over their supply chains, over their capacity to produce. Yeah, and today, when you ask somebody about a drone production, the first thing he comes is with regulation and certification. So this is all where we can play a role, as we played the role within ESG. On the emerging innovative winner, we need to focus on European champions. We need to get the scattered landscape. We need to leave that behind us. Yeah, and we need to, and we did already do that with John, the fair consideration in MOD procurement to keep that forward. So how did that look in real life? So I started always at the Munich Security Conference to have a panel and where I invite the CEOs of the primes, where I have military people, where I have startups, because it's crazy important that everybody develops a mutual trust. Trust is nothing else but accelerating processes, because you rely on somebody and you don't have so many frictions. So what are typical things that we need to do here? So we have corporations. The big companies do that themselves, but there are a lot where we can help. So you saw examples of the Saab and the Helsings. You saw examples of the ARX and the Helsings. You saw examples where ARX is working with Daimler Truck, or where Delta Squad in the Netherlands is already producing in a factory of VDL where BMW produced the Mini. We have a Porsche who is saying that they want to deploy a lot of money into that, and Schaeffler set up an own fund to look for companies, defense companies, that they can insource in their own production capacities. So having thought about all this, we looked that the NIF has this new challenge, which they didn't have like 2 years back, and we wanted to react by this in a very structured form. So we are constituting a geopolitical and strategic advisory council, where I proposed that I hand over my chairmanship of the NATO to Fiona to keep on more focused working on the work that NIF has been doing before. And we both asked NATO then to help us set up a very efficient group of people that help us tackle exactly these challenges. And this will be the council that will orchestrate the ecosystem that I will chair together with Fiona. But it is so important that NATO gave us Radmila, who will join the council, and 2 of the most important generals and admirals, helping us to deeply understand the way of the interface between the new economy and the military and the NATO. In excess of that, we needed to understand how the government side works. So we have Alexander and Kaisha, so to complement this. This is a short list. We will enlarge that, ideally with families from the production, so that we have the ecosystem in that council to push for the necessary steps here. And we wanted to do that in a very organized and structural way.
Thank you. And so I think the only thing that really remains to be said from my point of view is that it's an incredible pleasure to be taking over from Klaus as chair of the NATO Innovation Fund. But I think doing it under these particular circumstances, creating the Strategic and Geopolitical Advisory Council is a really extraordinary opportunity, I think, to continue to work closely together to make sure that we understand how we can use that council to build the industrial base, to really drive forward the industrialization and the reindustrialization, frankly, of Europe at scale. And I see this huge opportunity for us to couple and continue to couple the private sector ingenuity that is driving innovation with this extraordinary scaled industrial base that we have in Europe and that we can revitalize. Yep. And so really, Klaus, I mean, what a pleasure to continue to work together. And I just want to thank you for that opportunity and your willingness to do that. And I also just want to give a very special thanks to Resilience Media for, I mean, all the support that you are bringing to this, for shining a bright light on these questions, and for providing us, you know, a slightly echoey, quite chilly, but wonderful venue, very sort of evocative venue with cannons and other things out on the cricket field that really just gives us a place where we can have these conversations, and we look forward to coming back every year.
So to take away is, we started with, it was our combined vision to push the ecosystem. The first step was the NATO Innovation Fund for the fundament of the ecosystem. So this council is the natural prolongation of this vision, because we said we will always do what we think is the necessary thing for the moment, and this is, in our interpretation, what is most needed now, hence the council. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
That's it.